hope one of the things that people take away from the events is really that it is much safer to be vulnerable than you might think. And that a room full of strangers, even if you feel like you're talking too much, even if you feel like you're sharing too vulnerably, that the person from you probably is either content with how deeply you shared or wishes that you had shared more deeply. The first time I did that poll at Skip the Small Talk, it was a little reckless of me. I was just personally curious. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to tell these poor people if the results are not what I suspect them to be. I was like, I have no plan B for if it turns out that I am wrong. So good luck to me. And I was shocked that everyone was happy with how deeply their partner shared. Everyone wished their partner had shared more. It's been so consistent across the 9 years, across different demographics. And it's just been so heartening to see like the phenomenon I saw at the suicide hotline, where generally people underestimate how vulnerable they can be, how vulnerable their loved ones want them to be.
After that clip, you know the rest is going to be good. Please take 2 seconds to click the follow or subscribe button on your podcast player. You can set it once and forget tracking down each weekly episode. This makes your life easier and signals to the algorithms that the show should be recommended to other listeners. A simple act that can have an outsized positive impact on others. Now, let's get to it. Albert Einstein said, "Don't think about why you question, simply don't stop questioning." Welcome to Curated Questions. I am your host, Ken Woodward. And these questions are not mathematical equations, but rather a resource to encounter personal reflection and growth. As Tupac Shakur stated, even the genius asks questions. Now, let's engage the questioning community. Today's conversation is with Ashley Kirsner. Ashley is the founder and director of Skip the Small Talk and believes in the efficacy of high-quality person-to-person interaction for improving psychological health. She has conducted research with professors at prestigious organizations such as Cornell University, the Harvard Decision Science Lab, the Harvard Business School, the University of Miami, the Psychotherapy and Emotional Research Lab of Boston University, and McLean Hospital on social and clinical psychology topics ranging from decision-making and implicit bias to facial expressions in borderline personality and disorder patients. Ashley gained hands-on therapeutic experience as a suicide hotline phone responder and as a peer counselor at Cornell. Ashley received her BA in psychology from Cornell University and turned down acceptances to doctorate programs in order to devote her time to Skip the Small Talk. She received a fellowship from the Harvard Divinity School for individuals who have demonstrated a social impact in the domain of creating meaningful communities. Skip the Small Talk events are regularly held internationally, as well as online options. I participated in a Washington, D.C. event last week, and am thrilled to encourage listeners to jump into this opportunity for connection. Ashley, welcome to Curated Questions.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I always like to start off at the same spot as a baseline question to understand, when did you first understand the power of questions?
Yeah, I assume I intuitively knew it like everyone does for basically your entire life from when you're a child. But I feel like the moment I was really like consciously aware of the power of questions was when I was volunteering at the suicide hotline. It was one call in particular. And the concept of the suicide hotline is that when they're training you, you would think that it's mostly like tools about like how to reduce suicide risk and stuff like that. But honestly, the majority of your call is a combination of three things: what they call validations, reflections, and open-ended questions. Validations are basically just telling someone it makes sense that you're feeling this way, or oh, this is a very reasonable way to feel about this thing. Reflections are really just basically repeating what someone said in different words to make sure that you understand what's going on. And open-ended questions are intended to get people talking more about their feelings. And when I was taught that that's actually what you do in your calls, and then there's like a brief moment of a, suicide risk check, but really the majority of it is just active listening skills. And I was like, how would this possibly work? Like, what are we doing here? How could this possibly be effective? And it's just over the course of years, you see it it works like magic. And in fact, the one call where this was really evident to me was there was, and of course, I'm going to anonymize all of this, so
Yeah.
not use any names or anything, but there was a woman who called. I remember she was houseless. She was experiencing chronic illness. She was a single mother of a child with developmental delays, and she was living out of a car. And there were just so many challenges, one on top of the other, that when she told me she was considering taking her life, I honestly understood where she was coming from. I was like, I cannot fathom living that life. I don't know how by the end of this call I'm going to convince you to live life. And so I just did the things that I was taught to do. I just actively listened. And by the end of like a 15, 20-minute call, she somehow magically was like, okay, thank you so much. I feel actually a lot better now. Please check in on me tomorrow, but I'm feeling good now. And so it just does this weird magic that I think we don't fully understand. It's funny now to see all these people talking about active listening. Like I see Chris Voss talking about empathetic listening as like a hack from the CIA. And like, I hear all these, like, I hear all these people say crazy hack of how to like get inside people's brains, and it's just active listening. It just does this magic. And I think open-ended questions are such a generative part of active listening that it's become something I have been obsessed with for the last decade of my life, at least consciously.
Well, it's good to see that the rest of humanity is catching up to what you've been doing for a decade, but humanity's been doing for forever. Yeah. So at least we're all now giving a name to it. And it's like, this is what we're actually talking about.
Right.
Yeah. I do a lot of work with Brian Fretwell at the Finding Good efforts. Mm-hmm. And he's always talking about the campfire, right? Sitting around the campfire is what we historically would do. And this idea of just talking it through. Mm-hmm. Hey, what happened to your day today? And just this regular thing. This is that sense of community. That's what we've always known until now we don't have it as much. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a little bit shocked and a little bit not that the key to a suicide hotline is listening.
Yeah. It's wild to see. And I think active listening and open-ended questions are both so, I sort of have a montage going on in my head of all the time. I've had people say like, yeah, but like, what is listening going to solve? I need an actual solution to this. I need to problem solve. I need to fix it. And I think what we're learning as a society is that actually there is some weird magic to listening that allows the solving to happen more naturally, or it allows something that I think we're only now starting to pick apart and realize that there's some weird magic to it that we don't fully understand. I think especially it's so gendered. Like I hear a lot of men say, oh, I don't need you to listen. I just need a solution. I just need to fix it. When in reality, if you say, okay, I hear you, you just need to fix it. And they're like, oh, wow, I feel really understood because you reflected back that I just feel like I need to fix it. So yeah, I do feel like there is this interesting magic that we're not fully understanding about listening, and that I'm excited to live in a time where now researchers are starting to ask questions about like, well, what is it that asking questions actually does for us? There's an amazing study by Dr. Nicholas Epley where people who talk to strangers on a train, even people who self-identify as introverts, even people who say, oh, I don't want to talk to a stranger, that sounds so annoying. If they said, okay, great, so sorry, but we are going to ask you to actually talk to a stranger for like some number of minutes while you're on this train, invariably people just felt more connected by the end of it and enjoyed the experience, even those who predicted that they wouldn't. So there's something here about talking to people, about listening, about connecting, that people have a really bad intuition these days. Like, oh, that won't do anything for me. Or like, oh no, I'm going to be the first person in humanity who doesn't benefit from social interaction. And everyone thinks they're such a like, oh no, I'm an introvert. Oh no, I'm shy. But no, it turns out even for those people who self-identify as shy or introverts, even they benefit from talking to a human about meaningful stuff, it turns out.
Yes. Yeah. I'm glad that the science is, quote, catching up.
Yeah. Cool to see.
Oh, this is going to be a hard conversation because there's just so many different rabbit trails I want to go
Yeah.
down. So,
I feel the same way.
all right. So let's see. So back on the suicide hotline, why did you choose to do that?
Yeah, honestly, it was at a time where I was debating if I wanted to do clinicals. I was sort of deciding what I wanted to do with my life. And I was toying with the idea of getting a PhD in clinical psychology. And to do that, you need to do therapy. And I'd never done proper therapy before or anything quite like that in the position of like a therapist. So I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I want to get some hands on experience to see if I actually like this. And so that was actually how I found my way to the suicide hotline. But then once I was there, I actually just really enjoyed it. I think this is also something that doesn't get talked about a lot, where even if you're the one doing the active listening, you benefit from it as well. And you also experience a feeling of connection. So it was so ironic. I would leave the suicide hotline often feeling like really great and really in a great mood. And it was so bizarre to leave doing this often very intense work. But just, after having these conversations where people start off really stressed or feeling isolated, and then like within a course of like 10 to 15 20 minutes just getting them to a place where they're feeling more seen and understood, like it's contagious. I felt really awesome by the end of it too. So even by the time I decided to pursue skip the small talk, I stuck with it for a while just because it was like very personally satisfying to do, and not even personally satisfying and like, yes, I like did a great job and saved so many lives today, but because honestly a lot of the time you're not. A lot of the time it's very low risk calls. It's people who are just feeling isolated or lonely and just want people to talk to. But it was just viscerally pleasant to talk to a lot of different strangers in the period of a 4-hour shift. So yeah, that was my suicide hotline journey.
So you mentioned that we had the sliding scale, is what I'm hearing. Most of them were folks that were just struggling, and a conversation was just going to be super helpful, all the way to, I'm sure, the other end of that. So let's talk about the other end for a moment.
Okay.
If most of the conversations were 15, 20 minutes, and then you had the other end of the conversation in this deep end of the pool for what you experience as a suicide hotline counselor. What does that look like? How did that impact you? And then maybe even, I'm going to stack up all these questions,
Yeah,
sorry.
that's great.
But then were there questions that you found most impactful on that end, where it was like a break glass in case of emergency kind of thing, that you didn't need to use on the other end?
Yeah.
So
off
you go.
Great. Love that. My first thought is, of course, the sort of more logistical things of we sort of a series of questions to ask in terms of very practical questions like, are you feeling suicidal right now? Do you have like a weapon, or like, do you have a plan? Whatever your plan is, do you have any objects to complete that plan with you right now? Are you comfortable being in a different room from it while we're having this conversation? And then a lot of it was also just logistically. I think it went into a little bit more of logistical play, focusing more on the bottom couple rungs of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you're sort of like, oh, when's the last time you slept? When's the last time you ate? Can we get some food in you? Like, can we take a walk? I think of it DBT skills, which is short for dialectical behavioral therapy, which is a lot of just a modality of therapy that's really about trying to just like get through this moment. It's used for very high intensity things where it's like, okay, listen to music for like 5 minutes and then we'll call you back. Like, can you go on a walk? Can you talk to a friend? But often it was just like, how do we get you through the next like 10 minutes, 30 minutes, hour, like very short scale. So it did get very logistical in that end. But a question I started asking that really served me well and really taught me a lot at the hotline. And I would ask this for sort of all risk levels, but definitely more the like medium to high risk folks. I would ask something like, obviously you're going through a really hard time. And I would pick someone that they've mentioned in the call, because usually in the course of talking, they talk about loved ones in some capacity, like a partner, a roommate, a family member, something like that. So I would say, oh, I know you mentioned that you're close with your partner. Do they know anything you're experiencing right now? Or I know you mentioned you're close with your second cousin quite twice removed. Or have you talked to them about this? And almost almost all of our medium to high risk people would say, oh no, I have not brought this up with the people who
Mm.
are close to me. So that really struck me that they're happy to talk about this stuff with a complete stranger, but really didn't feel comfortable talking to the people that did love them and did know them. It was interesting to see that pattern. And after a while, I finally started asking the follow-up question. Oh, okay. So you don't talk about that sort of thing with, your loved ones. But if the roles were reversed and it were your partner or your cousin or your parent who were going through something like this, would you want them to tell you about it? And I have to tell you, 2 years at the suicide hotline, zero exceptions. Every single person I asked that to said, oh, of course I would want them to tell me about it if
Yeah.
they're struggling. And then they would sort of realize, like, oh, and then I was like, oh, well, I mean, the obvious question I ask now is, let's go back to the first question. Do you think they want to know if you're going through a tough time? I notice it myself if I'm feeling lonely or isolated, even for a brief period of time, even if it's just for a night where I wanted plans, but no plans happened. That my ability to anticipate how vulnerable other people want me to be is just so broken. I think when people are feeling
Mm.
isolated and lonely, that we are really bad at, I think there's some safety mechanism that happens where we are now less likely to be vulnerable, even though that's the exact thing that's going to help us feel less lonely and less isolated. So there's definitely some cognitive bias that's going on here. I think Brene Brown has a quote that's, vulnerability is the first thing I look for in others and the last thing I want to give of myself. And I see that all the time, but I saw that all the time at the suicide hotline. And, that was part of my impetus for starting Skip the Small Talk, where I was noticing that people were just so hesitant to be vulnerable, but everyone wanted vulnerability. So I was like, okay, what if we had a space where we were all on the same page? Like, it's what it says on the tin. It's about vulnerability. It's about sharing a little bit more than you might otherwise. So you can't make up excuses in your head of like, oh, I don't want to be a burden, because everyone else is there for the same reason. So that was one of the big inspiring moments for what led me to start Skip the Small Talk, a bit on a whim. It's a place where we can almost like shift some of our assumptions about vulnerability. So if we have these thoughts about like, oh, nobody really wants me to be vulnerable, could I put you in a room with people who actually specifically showed up because they want you to be vulnerable and because they want to be vulnerable with you? I thought of it as like a vulnerability gym where you're working out your vulnerability muscles. And like, can we do it in this low stakes context where it's strangers and maybe you have a great night and realize that nothing explodes when you're vulnerable? And then can you go home to like your roommate, your partner, your family, your neighbors, and be a little more vulnerable with them? And can you take that skill with you into the rest of your life? And we found that, yes, that is one of the most common pieces of feedback we get after our events is that people say like, oh, it really changed my perception about like what people are down to talk about. And that I really felt comfortable having these conversations all of a sudden with my partner and my roommate. And I went home that very night and started a conversation with my roommate that I never would have had otherwise. And so it was cool to see people were willing to sort of shift their perspectives, challenge their
Right.
perspectives
Yeah.
on how much is safe to share, which I thought was really cool to see. And it's something that I continue getting to see like 9 years later of doing this. People are still giving the like same exact feedback of like, oh yeah, like this really was sort of life-changing in a surprising way.
Yeah, you've totally shifted everything. Thanks for that. Wow.
Yeah. Thank you.
Wow.
Totally worth the 1850. Yeah.
You had mentioned earlier on about right now and using that in talking with folks that are in those precarious moments. And I've adopted that when I'm specifically talking with folks that are grieving, they lost somebody or they're just going through it right now. And I've found that adding just right now, how are you doing right now?
Yeah.
It cuts away all this other stuff. And it's like, I'm not talking about 5 minutes ago, and I'm not talking where I want to be in an hour or a week. How are you doing right now? That to me has been magical. Just that little addition has been so helpful in helping people control the chaos a little bit.
It's huge. It's huge because now instead of solving 800 problems in your future, you're solving maybe 3 problems right now, or you're taking steps right now for 1 problem or 3 problems. And it's funny you mentioned grieving in particular. This is something I think about a lot where almost everyone I know has sort of a next level of either like hopelessness or anger, whatever, that they can get into if their basic needs are not met. So, for instance, I think a great example, my best friend a long time ago was grieving the sudden loss of her father, which was deeply traumatic. It happened in the middle of COVID. Every day was a struggle. She was going through this impossible time. But even she had a sort of next level of hopelessness that she could get to, where it was sort of a cue to me if she would start getting particularly hopeless or overwhelmed or just feeling like things are impossible. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I would then sort of go back to the bottom level of the hierarchy of needs and start thinking, okay, let's talk food, let's talk sleep, let's talk hydration. And I would sort of be like, oh, I just realized I should probably eat dinner. Do you want anything? And then she'd be like, oh yeah, funny you mentioned that. I just had a bag of Doritos and nothing else today. I'd be like, there we go. That's what it is. Or like, oh, you know what? I should probably cut this short. I need to like take a nap. I really need to get to bed early. So just, we should probably end a little earlier than we might usually. And she's like, oh, that's a great idea. I actually got 4 hours of sleep last night. So, it's so interesting. We think just because we're dealing with these really very complex, difficult, sad situations that we're above, like that's the 100% cause of our distress, when in reality, we're still humans. We're still bags of flesh that are impacted by hunger, thirst, exhaustion, etc. So like, I really appreciate like focusing more on that bottom rung and then work like, okay, like we can talk about how we're going to deal with all these problems, but first let's just make sure that you are like a functioning human being and that you're like, you've eaten, you've drank, all that good stuff. And it's something I also think about with events a lot more now when I'm doing college orientation events where it's like a really big space with maybe hundreds of people in the same room. Now I'm thinking of like, okay, little things that I might not have thought of otherwise, where it's like, okay, what are the chairs like? Are they comfortable? Is there seating for everyone? And what's the air conditioning like? How can I make sure it's not going to be too hot with that many bodies in a room? Because I've noticed little things like that really impact your overall experience. And it's so funny how we think we're above that and that, no. The real reason I hated today was because of this horrible thing that happened, when in reality, all you had was 5 Doritos. And that might be more of why today sucked. So yeah, I think about that a lot.
That's helpful. I hadn't really considered that before. Let's just make it standard in our close relationships, just to have that check-in.
Yeah.
Right. If we're going to be having a conversation, let's just make this part of our process. So it's not something weird where it's just like, how you doing? You had something to eat. How you doing rest wise? And be able to clear the decks, if you will, on all of those other things, just to make sure we're in a good spot. So now we can function appropriately. And if we're not, if we can fix it real quick, or if it's a nap, then we just kick the conversation to later.
Yeah.
But why set ourselves up for failure at the jump?
Yeah.
Just with these basic things.
Yeah. Right. It's so much simpler than trying to figure out how you're going to solve these impossible problems. And I love the idea of normalizing those questions, because right now, even though that was my best friend who experienced that, the times I flat out ask her, like, girl, you hungry? What's going on? Like, she did not, people don't love being asked like find it insulting. They're like, well, yeah, I'm starving, but that's not why I'm mad. And I'm like, so fair, but it is going to take the edge off so much more than you know. So,
yeah. Back to genius hack.
Yeah, genius hack, right. In the CIA, we learned that if you're, it's so funny when my partner and I sort of joke about this is like rebranding empathy for men. Where they're like, see, cool CIA hack to like get you to like get secrets out of people. Just listen. And like, I feel like this is going to be the next level of like genius, like FBI hack to like get people to talk, make sure they're well fed and that they had a good nappy.
Indeed. So maybe your secret's going to be writing empathy with camouflaged font for all the guys and or with race wheels on it, or NASCAR across it, and nice.
With like cigar scented, like stuff. Yeah.
There we go.
Scented lumberjack, like as our little like logo. Yeah.
It's all coming together. You hear it here first, right? Now, when you get 1 billion views on TikTok and it all comes together, then we'll know where we started.
Yeah. No, I love that.
How was it that you decided to do your first Skip the Small Talk event?
Yeah, it was on a bit of a whim, and I definitely thought of it as just a one-time thing. It honestly did not occur to me that this would be an ongoing thing. Honestly, part of it was from the suicide hotline, just sort of noticing that, okay, people generally tend to vastly underestimate how vulnerable their loved ones want them to be. But also, if I'm being honest, I was also noticing it was really hard for me to like make those deeper, more interesting conversations happen in my everyday life, where not necessarily talking about the intensity of like every problem I'm going through, but even just like talking a little more vulnerably than you might on a day-to-day basis, just talking about like, wow, like back then it was like, oh, dating sucks, and the apps are a nightmare, what now? Or I'm thinking of leaving my job. Like these sort of bigger questions that I felt like I wasn't necessarily getting to in my groups of friends. For instance, back then I was actually, this is a little embarrassing, but I had joined a Reddit craft beer club, which is not inherently embarrassing, but it is embarrassing because I did not enjoy craft beer, and it was just a way to regularly hang out with people. And I was just hoping no one would notice that I was ordering club soda and hanging out with everyone else. And they're like, why is yours pale? I just came and hung out with people. And what I noticed is that even though we were hanging out pretty much once a week over the course of like probably a year, several years or so, I was just noticing that like every so often we would get to this part in the night where people would suddenly feel a little more comfortable opening up about whatever they were going through, whether it was like, God, I gotta be real with you, dating sucks. That was a really common one at the time. You know, I'm having a crisis of like my values, or really big questions that people were experiencing, but they would only talk about it after a few beers, maybe once every few months. My fantasy would be if we could just get to that part. Like, what would it take to just like create a space where everyone's on board, where we're just going to do that part? And you can drink, but you don't have to. We don't have to wait until 5 hours of small talk before we actually get to that part. And so I sort of on a whim put up a Facebook event, expected maybe a few of my Facebook friends might show up. And before I knew it, it was 50 people. So we had sold out weeks in advance. It was mostly people I'd never met before. I got a bunch of friends to help me last minute, put it together and just logistically make it work. And we'd use these question prompts that I had developed based on some of the psychology research that I'd been involved in about what kind of questions help us feel more connected. So I optimized for that. And I gave people the prompts. We had a little bit of structure to it. And it was supposed to be a 3-hour long event, and I had to kick people out after 7 hours. People kept asking me oh, when's the next one going to be? And I said, oh no, this is it. Sorry guys. And then one person, and this is not an exaggeration, this is a real thing that happened. A stranger who was talking to me and said, when's the next one going to be? And I said, oh, there's not going to be a next one. She put her hands on my shoulders and said, you should really reconsider that. You really probably could do another one of these. And so I said, okay, please don't hurt me. Thank you so much. The deal I made with myself was, okay, I'll keep hosting these as long as people keep showing up. And the day that people stop showing up for these, I'll know that this has run its course. This is no longer filling a need, and I will feel happy with whatever happens. And I expected that number to be okay, we have 3 events, and then it petered out. But it's been 9 years of doing this. We're now in 20 cities, including a few internationally. So it seemed like that need is still there. And if anything, is still growing, that we're still feeling this need to find safe enough spaces to feel vulnerable, practice vulnerability, and to really have spaces where you can just meet new people. That was also a thing that emerged. That when I originally conceptualized this, I thought that the main value was going to be bringing this back to the people you already know. But it turns out that when you're vulnerable with a stranger, you mostly want to stay in touch with them. And people would end up making lifelong friends from the event, from just being vulnerable. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that part, where when you're vulnerable with someone, you usually feel closer to them, of course. And so then it evolved to a way for people to meet new friends and even a way for people to find new romantic partners. We experimented with we now have speed dating events in certain cities. It's been really interesting to see how it's evolved into fulfilling needs I didn't even necessarily anticipate it fulfilling when I started.
It's an amazing origin story. There's a couple things that I want to emphasize is how you made it so low stakes for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It was like, this is one and done, just basic. We're going at it. I will say that you nailed it on the name. That is like the perfect name.
Thank you.
One of the things that I love about it is an excuse, because like in 2018, I did this thing where it was my hashtag year of connection. And it was specifically so I could go have conversations with people that I didn't know. So this is my own project. But by virtue of me choosing a hashtag, and then that now gave me permission to approach literally anyone and say, I'm doing this project tied to this hashtag that I just made up. And that because I could point to something outside of me, much like yourself, skip the small talk. This is something outside of you, but it's scratching your own itch, or you see the need for it. Anyone can do this, right? So it's whatever the need is. So this is a hack for you. Just name it, and then you can point to it, and then you can go execute your vision.
Yeah. 100%.
So just name it. Doesn't matter. Almost doesn't matter what it is. Although, like I say, you hit one out of the park with your name. But that
right. It doesn't matter.
I just love the simplicity of what you did, and you set the bar so low. You're like, one event, and I'm done. This is beautiful.
Yeah. I so appreciate that, because definitely the way I still think about how it happened, I think I cumulatively over the last 9 years of doing this, I've had probably 5 seconds worth of bravery where and the rest has just been pure pressure and momentum. Now, it just took several seconds of bravery to click submit on the okay, here's a Facebook event that I'm posting publicly. And that was a moment of bravery. And then the rest of it was just people saying, hey, you should do this. And then me going, okay, I will. Once you have the momentum, it was just oh, now this is the thing we do. So really, if you can just muster up a few seconds of bravery to do the thing. And I always like the tool of public commitment, where you publicly commit, just put up an event and then figure out what it means afterwards. So say that you're doing a thing and then figure out what that means. But that has always been how I've thrived the most. Definitely just saying, okay, yes, we totally have this program. That's how we started a million years ago over COVID, when we had to figure out online events. We had one scheduled for March 2020. Big shocker, did not happen. Or rather, did not happen in person. But what happened was I just emailed all of our guests who had signed up. I said, hey, just so you know, this is going to be an online event now. Don't worry, we're still doing it. And then I looked at my partner and said, hey, can you help me figure out how we're going to do an online event?
Is this even possible?
Is this even possible? And then we ended up being really one of the first organizations to figure out how to translate in-person events to online events without making you want to gouge your eyes out. So we were one of the first to realize by doing it, we just did it first. And we were learning lessons as we first started. We were like, wow, 2.5 hours in person really feels different online. Let's keep that a little tighter, maybe. How do you have people switch partners in a way that makes sense online? Oh, look, here are the capabilities that Zoom can do. Here's what Zoom can't do. I guess we'll need to train people to manually pair people up so that it works. So even just little logistics, we figured out as we went. If I had originally just asked my partner, hey, is it possible to do an online event? He probably would have been like, no, it'd be a giant pain in the butt. But because we committed first, and then we were like, okay, how do we do this? We had to figure it out. And then we figured it out. And we were among the first to do that. When colleges started asking, hey, we're trying to do orientation, but we have to do it online. What do you got for us? We were like, no problem. We can totally do that. And then we were like, okay, how do we do this for hundreds of people? Let's figure that out really quick on our own. So yeah, a lot of it is just committing and figuring it out on the way. And that is absolutely how, 99% of Skip the Small Talk has happened. So yeah, I love that. Just commit to something, figure it out as you go.
There we go. And at this point, nobody's going to die.
Right.
And right. So
Right.
it's like,
Things are so low. What's the worst that happens?
okay.
Yeah.
The event fumbles a little bit or whatever, or
Yeah.
it takes longer. It's clunky.
Right.
Okay.
And it's never as bad as it feels on the inside. This is something I tell all my facilitators, that you're going to be so aware of all the little hiccups that happen. And, oh, I should have said it this way, but I said it this way instead. Your guests don't know what it's supposed to look like unless
Right.
they've been to a million of these. And if they have been to a million of these, then they love it already. I've noticed this phenomenon a lot where we're way more judgmental of ourselves than other people are. And in fact, I used to work at a social anxiety lab where this was empirically tested. And it was so wild for me to get to be a part of these people's anxiety exposures, where these people who are socially anxious are forced to talk to me because I'm their worst nightmare. I'm there like intentionally trying to make them a little bit anxious so they can basically correctly do cognitive behavioral therapy, because it has to make you a little bit anxious to work. So I'm there talking to them. And afterwards, I'm there while they rate like how anxious they felt. And I get to see them rank super, super high. They're like, oh, I'm a 9 on a scale of 1 to 9. And I'm there like, oh, I never would have guessed that. You were just completely delightful to talk to. I see this all the time at Skip and Small Talk too, where people say, oh my gosh, I was so awkward. I was so weird. I was so uncomfortable. I just wasn't as socially charming as I expect myself to be. And I'm like, dude, I watched you the whole, like, I saw you and I saw people give you their phone number. Like, what planet are you living on? So it's just been very validating to see that a lot of people's inside world don't match how other people perceive them. And that's been wildly empowering for me to know when I'm feeling anxious on the inside.
Going back to the questions you mentioned, can you talk about that story of where you pulled them from, and then why you choose the different questions that you do, and pull that apart a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I use a lot of the research on just like what sort of makes us feel most interpersonally connected. So for instance, I think like one of the big ones that people are familiar with is like the 36 questions to fall in love, which actually the study that was branded for the New York Times article about it, but in reality, it was just 36 questions to promote interpersonal connection. Basically, what they're finding is that deeper questions make you feel more connected than shallower ones. But also there's some research that questions about internal states are more connecting than questions just about like factual things. So when I'm saying internal states, I mean things like opinions, feelings, past experiences. So a lot of our questions are trying to get at things that you might not necessarily know. But instead of where do you live, it's like, what do you like about where you live? For instance, our questions are a little deeper than that, but sort of the distinction, what is your internal experience of fill in the blank? And the other thing, the setting has evolved such that, when we first started this, we did it sort of semi-legally in public parks where we got permission mostly and it was fine. Please don't come after me, the city of Boston Parks, because it was a setting of just like open air. The vibe was a little different, whereas now we're in venues like bookstores, breweries, cafes, and people often come in with the intention more of like making friends. And for that reason, we've shifted our questions to be a little more strengths-based and a little more positive to neutral. When I first started, I didn't really know what I was doing. So I was asking intense questions like, what's the worst thing you've ever experienced? Or like, when's the last time you cried? Which is like, great questions, but also, if you're going to be like 10 to 15 minute long conversations one-on-one, a lot to be going from when's the last time you cried to like your next conversation about like when's the last time you experienced awe, for instance. So it was a bit of whiplash. We smoothed it out a little by making it more positive. Also, I think I've noticed that just people, I think right now we're in a point in our relationship to technology and our relationship to the news where we are bombarded with so much negative stimuli at all times that like we kind of need more positive to neutral stimuli to balance it out, as well as just to give us a more realistic perception of the world. Because I think right now we like are disproportionately experiencing all this negative stuff on the internet, whereas like the average stranger in real life doesn't want to punch you in the face, whereas the average stranger on the comments section of YouTube, you might guess differently. So I think just shifting a little bit more, attuning to the needs of what I'm sensing people are needing now to be a little more strengths-based. So those are some of the ways that our questions have evolved. I think we've also done more trying to get at pieces that you might not normally share with people. For instance, a very simple question that I really like: what's something you're proud of that you don't normally get to share with people, or that might not be on a resume? Specifically asking, what are pieces of yourself that you don't normally get to share? We've gotten feedback that those questions feel really connecting because, where you get to feel really seen about a piece of yourself that you might have felt a little shameful about, or just might not have gotten the opportunity to share about. And that's where you get, I think, a lot of mileage and feeling connected. So those are some of the tidbits. There's like a million other, but those are the main things that come to mind of like how sort of thought about what sort of questions make people feel more connected. And we've seen some of the feedback we get are like, these are some of the best questions I've ever seen in my life. We have a card deck that is sold separately from the events. Like you could get it on Amazon, for instance. And like I have heard from like an 80-year-old couple that they learned stuff about each other that they never knew in the 50 years they've been together. It's cool to see that this is both effective. And it makes me think that these sorts of questions are effective not just with strangers, but people you interact with on a regular basis. And that getting to draw out pieces that you might not normally get to see of people is really a juicy area for connection.
Absolutely. We never really interview, if you will, our spouse or our partner, whatever that looks like, even our friends. Right?
Yeah.
And so to your point earlier, it's only after a few beers that the crazy stories come. Whereas having some questions that you're intentionally working through can just be a fun way to hear some of those stories that you just never heard.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's something. One time, my partner had to do the questions. I was like, "Oh, that's so cheesy. Like, come on." And he was like, "No." I was like, "I already know all your answers to these." And he was like, "We might as well try. And then if it turns out we know it already, we can jump ship." And I said, "Fine." And so we started doing them, and I accurately predicted 0% of his answers. I was completely wrong about everything, and I learned a ton about him and about myself. And I didn't even know my own answers to a lot of these until I talked about them. I think we have a tendency to be overconfident about how well we know the people in our lives. And it's cool to know that even if you've been with someone for 5 years, even if you've known someone your whole life, there's probably more there that you can still learn about them.
Absolutely. And I also think that kind of how you shuffle a deck, because you may answer the question one way the first time around. And if it was question number one at the top of the deck, and then the next time you shuffle it, you encounter that after you've experienced 15 or 20 questions, it may pull up other things or amplify different elements of things.
Yeah.
So to think that it's one and done is probably wrong.
Right. We have regulars at our events who have been to like dozens of events and come every time there's a new event. And what I try and do, since we have like 100 question prompt cards, I always say at our events, like, feel free to pick a new one if you get one that you've gotten before, or if you have a repeat. And I've had multiple, independently of each other, multiple regulars tell me, "Oh, actually, I don't like getting a fresh card. I will still answer the same question because I like seeing how my answer changes from week to week. I am happy answering the same questions because my answers change. And also, of course, the person you're talking to has a variety of answers. And it's so eye-opening to see 5 different people's answers to like any given question, because then you actually get to see the pattern. Like, oh, tell me about some of your happiest moments, for instance. Like you might notice that, oh, wow, everyone I've spoken to has a different set of happiest moments, but they all involve other people, or they all involve some elements of XYZ. So it also has been a tool for a lot of people. It's like learn more about humanity, to see the inside pieces of the human experience that you wouldn't otherwise get to see the inside of. It's cool that even if you're asking or answering the same question every week, you're going to get different answers.
Even in some of the examples I'm going to talk through, I've shifted away in my questions from asking for the absolute, if you will, right? To say, what is your favorite ice cream? Because then it's like, that could change. And then there's all these other variables. So just make the question easy and say, what is a favorite ice cream, right? Now it opens it up. I don't have to do this rack and stack and take 20 minutes to figure out what is exactly my favorite one right now.
Right.
Instead, it can be, I actually have 5 favorites. I'm going to give you one.
Yes.
So just, it makes for easier conversation not to go with the absolute. Just get it close enough.
Totally. And that's actually something that we changed in our cards. It used to be for our first event, it was like, what's the worst or the best or your favorite? And now every one of our questions is instead, what's one of the best, one of the worst, one of your favorite? It makes such a big difference because otherwise people panic and they're like, oh gosh, I love this one, but is it really my favorite? Oh gosh, Rocky Road is so good, but can I really say it's better than Cotton Candy? So yeah, I can see the stress happen when people have to pick one favorite. Yeah, that is definitely a great tip.
Please take 2 seconds to click the follow or subscribe button on your podcast player. You can set it once and forget tracking down each weekly episode. This makes your life easier, a simple act that can have an outsized positive impact. As I mentioned at the top, I had a chance to go to an event last week. I really enjoyed it. So the form was just real quick, got there a little bit before 7, just sat down with a guy, had a great conversation. He might have been to one of them before. Like when it came time to officially start, he's like, this is my terminology. He wanted to get his money's worth out of it. So he's like, all right, let me go ahead and pivot to somebody else. And I'm like, all right, cool. And then as it turned out, we bumped into each other and he was at my last conversation. So we actually did have one kind of thing and that worked out super cool.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, it was kind of this speed dating thing where we had like roughly 10 minutes and it was 5 minutes for each of myself and the conversation partner to talk. So that was cool. But one of the most important things I want to mention was that after the first round, your team paused and Emma, who was the woman that was running the show in DC, she ran this poll where she had everyone close their eyes. So now it's this anonymous thing nobody else can see. And she asked these questions about if they had enough opportunity to speak, if they wish their partner would have had a chance to speak more, or if they would have spoken more. And this series of questions, and you had no idea what the numbers were looking like. And then at the end, she said, this has been consistent. Every one of these is the same, is that everyone would love to hear more from their conversation partner. And where that hit home for me. So for me, I like to talk. I engage with people. This is my jam. But one of my conversation partners later on, she told me that she really struggles with anxiety. And it's really tough coming in she's always anxious coming in. But then after she gets there, loosens up, then it's good. So I asked her, what was something that this organization has done right to help you? And she came up with exactly this. She talked about this. She said, I didn't want to take all the air out of the room. And I just felt I was holding myself back and wanting to have this conversation. And this really encouraged me to share more.
Oh.
And that to me resonated deeply.
Yeah.
With somebody coming into this, with a little bit of anxiety. And this has been something that she's been working on intentionally. For you and what your team is doing, it really meant a lot to me. So I pitched that out as an example of what the format's like for those that are listening, and your care in how you're applying the science of the things that you know, such that it sets people up for the best chance for success in having these conversations and diving in. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, thank you for telling me that. I am so thrilled to hear that, because really, if people take one thing away from my events, I hope it is, I hope a lot of things, but I hope one of the things that people take away from the events is really that it is much safer to be vulnerable than you might think. And that a room full of strangers, even if you feel like you're talking too much, even if you feel like you're sharing too vulnerably, that the person from you probably is either content with how deeply you shared or wishes that you had shared more deeply. And the first time I did that poll at Skip the Small Talk, it was a little reckless of me. I was just sort of personally curious. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to tell these poor people if the results are not what I suspect them to be. I was like,
Mm.
I have no plan B for if it turns out that I am wrong. So good luck to me. And I took the bull and I was shocked that like everyone was happy with how deeply their partner shared. Everyone wished their partner shared more. It's been so consistent across the 9 years, across the different kinds of events, across different demographics. And it's just been so heartening to see that like the phenomenon I saw at the suicide hotline, where like generally people underestimate how vulnerable they can be, how vulnerable their loved ones want them to be. It was really heartening to see like almost real data accumulating over 9 years that like, yeah, that's really consistent across people, that really the person sitting across from you wants to hear more about your inner life and more about your inner world. Or one thing I've noticed over time is like when we say that someone's overshared, often what it really means is not that they shared too much information. It's usually that you feel too much pressure to fix their problems. Like the
Hmm.
example I think about is, have you ever seen a movie where you're like, wow, that character really overshared? Probably not, because you never feel obligated to help this fictional character in a movie. So it's not really about how vulnerable someone's sharing. It's more about, oh, does someone share something in a way where now I feel responsible for them? They want me to fix their problems. So I think oversharing is definitely a different phenomenon. But we think it's about, I shared too deeply about myself. I went too hard, when in reality, that's, in my experience, has never been the case.
So, what what do you think it is about the structure that allows for that to happen? Things that come to mind for me is that this is a short amount of time.
Yeah.
You've only got 10 minutes before you're rotating to the next person. Right. So that probably is a piece of it.
Yeah.
But any other thoughts on what other elements are at play here?
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. I think a big part of it is that it's a limited amount of time where there's already a built-in time where you are going to part ways. So while someone's talking to you about bearing their soul, you don't have to be like, oh, I'm so sorry, excuse me, I want to make the rounds and talk to more people. You're given ample warning. You know what the timeline is. You know, you're halfway through. Like you might like keep it shorter. I think people are better at managing how deep they're going when there's a clear time frame. And it happens unconsciously. I've never seen it where someone's like, really like going deep into it and then they're like, oh no, it was weird to mess it up. Like it just seems to work out. I have no idea why. Someone should go study it, but it does seem like the fact that it is so clearly structured seems to really help. I think it also helps that everyone who's showing up is down to do the same thing, that they're all opting into this experience. Whereas if you just walk up to a person who's having coffee by themselves at a cafe, like they're not opting in to you going, hey, tell me about your deepest trauma. You know, that's not going to work. Also, obviously, the nature of our questions, they're not intended to be triggering or traumatic. They're more strengths-based, they're more positive. So you're not going to be talking about that sort of thing unless you organically bring it up. I think another thing that really helps is also just like the tone setting at the beginning by the facilitators, that it's like a little playful, like a little acknowledging that like this is a little bit of a weird space and it's normal to be anxious. And, you know, the fact that we set some norms at the beginning. I think another big thing is also the norms that we set in terms of how people are staying in touch with each other or not, where the norm is not necessarily that you stay in touch with every person you talk to. The norm is that you, for folks listening, I know obviously you know this, Ken, but like you would write down your name on a slip of paper and your contact info and give it to someone if you want to stay in touch with them. But it's not necessarily expected. There's not a time where we're like, okay, and now you give your contact info if you want to, and now if you don't, stare awkwardly at each other. Like it's not awkward. It's very natural. And if one person wants to give the contact info and the other doesn't, you know, it's very natural for only one person to give the contact info and for the other not to. So I think there's just some little nuances in how we've evolved the norms of staying in touch with each other, where it's like not expected. It's just bonus if you do want to give out your contact info. And I think just the little ways that like our facilitators like talk about it and just leave the sheets out and let it happen organically, but don't like force anyone to do it and don't like have any clear cut time to do it. Where if you give out your contact info, great, but it's like very low pressure. And also the fact that like we take away the norm that exists in everyday life where you ask for someone else's contact info. I think it's so much more elegant to just give out your own. I think it's so much less pressure. So if only one person gives out the contact info, it's really clear whose job it is to follow up. So I think that whole structure also makes it so that there isn't a clear, oh no, you're my therapist now. You're locked into this. You have to listen to me complain for the rest of our relationship. The little details of that, I think, really make a difference. I think there's a lot of nuances that make it, you're not locked in. I think that's a big part of what makes it feel a little safer to share with folks.
Thank you for the details on that. Because those details really do matter.
Yeah.
I like that you've been intentional about iterating on this and implementing these little tiny, what others may see as small, but I felt the care in those small details.
Thank you.
And I'm approaching this from a extrovert, middle-aged white guy. So I am completely safe in most circumstances. And most of my conversation partners were women who are far younger than I am. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they felt that they were in a safe place, to me, speaks volumes for the work that you're doing, such that there wasn't any expectation. It wasn't a creeper of this middle-aged dude forcing a business card or asking for numbers and all of that. So it really could default to, let's have a conversation and let's just connect as people. There are no strings. It's just an opportunity to hear each other's stories a little bit. So those are many of the things that I picked up on. So once again, I just really appreciate you continuing to refine, really to protect and to care for those that are not in my particular situation.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. Yeah, honestly, I feel like part of it is also we've gotten so lucky that the folks who show up to these events are just some of the warmest, kindest people I've met in my life, where something about showing up to an event that's intentionally about conversation, we have gotten extraordinarily lucky that the people who are showing up are like well-meaning folks who just want to have conversations with people. I feel like I just really lucked into that. I feel like part of it is also our facilitators are fantastic and do such a great job setting up just like a tone and a vibe. And like they're offering co-regulation for our guests, where most people coming in are feeling a little anxious and feeling a little like weird about it. Like being able to like get people almost physiologically and emotionally to a place where they're going to be a little more present. I think they just are magical at it. I know Emma in DC is fantastic. Shout out Emma. She's outstanding. And so are all our facilitators. So yeah, I feel like that's also something that we did luck out at, where like I sort of joke that the one thing I did really figure out with Skip the Small Talk that I really nailed was hiring. Just because our facilitators are incredible humans. Like I sort of joke, if my relationship were different, I would probably be best friends with all of our facilitators. If I did not hire them, we would be best friends. I think we just have really lucked out with the people. And part of it is also the structure, making it very low stakes. I think I learned a lot of lessons at the suicide hotline, as well as just from doing this and iterating for 9 years. Also, just like me being more conscientious about like conversational differences across genders, across races, across ages has really allowed me to do these tiny tweaks that is so validating to me to hear that you noticed. Thank you so much for that. Because otherwise, a lot of people are like, oh, it looks so simple. Let me host one. And then they're like, wait, why did that suck? I did basically the same thing. I've noticed that a lot of little things make a really big difference, especially people with oppressed identities, making those folks like feel more comfortable and more safe. It's a lot in the little things and a lot in just some phrasing differences and a lot in just the little structural things that make folks feel a little more comfortable. That means a lot to me that you saw people feeling that way and that you felt that way too. I am really delighted to hear that.
So there is a nominal fee. It was less than $20 to go. But I also think that's important
Yeah.
because it means that I have invested. I've got skin in
Yeah.
this game that generally would not be an amount that excludes folks, but it does mean that I am here with intent.
Yeah.
I am investing here. I've made the effort to get here. So that would probably also dissuade folks that are just there to be snarky or
Yeah.
to disrupt things anyway.
Yeah.
It's kind of culling the herd, if you will, to say the folks that are here, they are invested.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is something I torn my hair out about for years. Of like, okay, I want this to be accessible. There is research showing that having some amount of financial investment makes you value an experience more. And also for an experience where it's so much about what you put out into it is what you get back. It felt important to have some sort of skin in the game. And I also noticed that like our events have a lower show up rate than most other events just because all things equal, people get cold feet more often for Skip the Small Talk because it feels a little more vulnerable. Because also it occurs to me that like people are not used to showing up to an event by themselves with the intention of talking to a bunch of different people. Like usually you're there with your like friends or your friend group or your partner or like some sort of like armor or protection. But the majority of people show up to these alone. So it's a lot more vulnerable and people get nervous last minute. So being able to like have a little bit more barrier to entry, but also honestly, the way I've balanced that with accessibility is we also just have a policy where if anyone makes the trouble to email us or reach out to us and say, hey, finances would be a barrier, can you help me out? We just let people in for free. Like we are just no questions asked. It happens periodically where someone will say, 1850 would be enough to make me stay at home and not do this. I know it's obviously very difficult financially right now for most people in America. If that is a barrier to showing up, we just let people in, no questions asked. And that's been my balancing of, okay, we want people to show up. We want people to like have this investment in it. And also, of course, there's the other part of, I think about this so much about, it's important to me that we pay our facilitators. I am very fortunate, and this is more something about my privilege, not about anything else, that I am able to not take a cut from the revenue. That just goes back into like the facilitators and the marketing and the overhead of like our website and all the little costs of keeping up our meetup groups and all that stuff. So I mean, something that has been really important to me is to make sure that our facilitators are actually getting compensated. I think it's interesting that we sort of expect a lot of traditionally women's work of gathering to go uncompensated and that, oh, you should just do that from the joy of your heart. You should do that 10-hour training about mental health, how to make us trauma informed from the goodness of your soul. And I'm like, great, do you want to do it for free? And they're like, well, no, I wouldn't do it, but I want someone else to do it for me. I don't have time. I need to spend my time making money because we live in capitalist societies. It's been important to me to do a little bit to just sort of shift perspective of like, no, that work really is valuable. And like, it is work just because it's also very satisfying and fun doesn't mean it's any less worth compensating than any other career that's satisfying. Like, it feels like the same kind of job as like teachers or therapists who are also doing these really interpersonal, very purpose-driven jobs, but I don't think that necessarily means that that work doesn't deserve to get paid. So anyway, this is my little soapbox I have where I'm like, look, the only reason I get to not take a cut is because I'm privileged. That is not from like any merit or anything. That is just like the way the world works, unfortunately. My facilitators deserve to be compensated for the insane amounts of time and work and effort and emails that happen behind the scenes, like retrainings that go on and like the talking back and forth of how to tweak the events to accommodate an ever-changing like zeitgeist of how we feel about strangers. They deserve it. So people also deserve to attend for free, but given that we live in a society that runs on money, this is where we've landed for now. I have very strong feelings about it, and I'm happy with where we landed, but I also, it's imperfect until we are able to value things differently in American society. This is what it looks like for now.
All I'm going to do is just give you a microphone while you're standing on the soapbox as far as I'm concerned. Because it is work.
Yeah.
I got far more value than my 1850 out of it. I absolutely agree. You are providing an amazing service and opportunity. And so, yeah, people should be compensated. Period. Thank you for setting it up that way and not just hoisting this quote, opportunity on your facilitators to have the great benefit and do all the work for free. So thank you for setting that up.
Thanks for saying that. That's really meaningful to hear, actually. Thanks.
Yeah. And that's from somebody near DC, where all this other chaos is going on. So at least
yikes.
I'm sending up the good vibes up north to you.
Thank you.
An observation that I had out of this is not a product promotion, although if they want to sponsor the show, the answer is yes. But I have an 8 sleep system on my bed that records all the biometrics of sleep. And after the event, I had a much higher rate of deep sleep than I normally do. I'm normally at about an hour and 15 minutes worth of deep sleep. I was just shy of 2 hours. And there was nothing else that really changed.
Wow.
It was a sweaty evening out in DC, but I don't think that's going to change it that much.
Yeah.
But as I was reflecting back on this, I remember another time where I had a long, deep conversation with someone and my deep sleep spiked.
Wow.
And I've got the data for it. So I don't have the science for it. I've reached out to a couple of people, but don't have anything definitive back on this. But I do wonder on the effect of these conversations on us physiologically, as well as mentally, for what this offers. So whether it's an encouragement to come to one of your events, which I highly encourage, or engaging with those people around you with the intent, even selfishly, to say, there's probably additional benefits to this stuff that I'm not even aware of.
Yeah.
So let me engage with this, even for selfish reasons. So that's my big story there. So what are your thoughts?
I've been thinking about that since you mentioned that in that email to me. And it very much resonates with my personal experience of hosting a really satisfying event, or when I get to jump in and talk to people, if someone else is hosting an event and I get to attend, or even just when I'm in everyday life and these conversations happen organically. It is so consistent that I do feel physiologically different. And the research I can think of that supports this, I wonder if sleep is part of the mechanism for this. But I don't know exactly if sleep ties in, but I think this is such an interesting, rich area for some really smart social scientists to work on, because I do think this is almost certainly something that is a consistent phenomenon. But I will say what researchers have figured out. I can say, first of all, for skip the small talk, we did have a third-party researcher from Tufts University actually come up to us and ask to study us as an intervention for loneliness. And we said, sure, that sounds awesome. And they basically found some interesting stuff, some surprising, some not so surprising. So the sort of not so surprising things is they did a sort of before and after an event of ours. How did people feel? They measured them on anxiety and depression metrics. And they found that even after just one event, from a before and after, people felt less anxious, less depressed, less lonely, more connected. And they also found that impact was seen. We can't necessarily determine, for my psychology nerds out there, we cannot determine causation necessarily, but it is an interesting correlation that the more events somebody attended, the greater those effects were. So the lower the depression, the lower the anxiety, the lower the loneliness and isolation, the increase of connection. So that was very cool to see. But my favorite little tidbit from that particular study was that the worse mood you were in coming into an event, the greater the mood boost you saw by the end of it. So whenever I see someone being really grumpy on the internet about this sounds dumb, why would I do this? I'm like, you're perfect. Come.
You are the one.
You are the one. You have most to benefit from this. Please come. That was fun to see that actually everyone sees a mood boost. Even if you come in a good mood, you end in a better mood. But the people who see the biggest difference is if you manage to get yourself there, even though you're in a crappy mood, you're going to see some real benefits to it, which was really cool. So that's the chunk of research that is specific to skip the small talk. And I know more globally, there's a ton of research. I know we think of loneliness as impacting our mental health, of course, that loneliness contributes to suicide risk, depression risk, anxiety risk. But there's also, this incredible, breadth of literature out there about how it also impacts our physiological health. So it increases loneliness. Actually, if I'm remembering correctly, it is just as deadly as smoking an entire pack of cigarettes a day, which is crazy. And of course, we see all these warnings on cigarette packages, but we don't see similar warnings to what happens if you use technology to avoid talking to people for days at a time. So we're in an unprecedented time where you could spend entire days at a time using Instacart, Netflix, just a million amazing technologies out there that are useful in a lot of ways, but also you could live a life where you never talk to a person. And that did not used to be true. In order to get groceries, you used to have to interface with a human. In order to get entertainment, you had to go out and go to a movie theater and talk to the person who's selling you your ticket. Even these micro interactions are helpful. I think we're seeing the impact of that now in the loneliness epidemic. I remember there were so many health risks for loneliness in particular. For instance, I remember it was your cancer risk goes up, your risk of cardiovascular diseases goes up significantly, neurodegeneration, you're likelier to get Alzheimer's, you're likelier to get a lot of brain-specific diseases. So we're just learning that loneliness is super awful for you, but we're also learning the flip side, that connection does boost health in all these metrics. And we know that the blue zone research is somewhat controversial about how accurate it is, but I will say that there is a lot of interesting blue zone research about the places where people live significantly longer than the average throughout the world, where connection and community is one of the biggest predicting factors of longevity. So we're seeing that it does have all these physiological impacts. And we also, separately from all this, know that sleep has huge physiological health impacts as well, and that poor sleep quality also predicts neurodegeneration, heart diseases, cancers, all these other health risks. So that is what we know. That is uncontroversial. People know this. Yeah. Most social scientists would say, yes, I know that. What I'm saying is I'm wondering if those are connected, and if part of the reason that feeling connected helps us, maybe part of what mediates its improvement on health is the sleep quality. I am wondering if part of what makes connection help you live longer is that it makes your sleep quality better. So that wouldn't surprise me if years from now we're seeing findings like that. I will say I did do a brief look. I don't see that studies have been done on that yet, but for all you social scientists out there, please get on it. I'm happy to help. Call me up. Please study our guests there, obviously with consent, but let us know. That would be so stinking cool.
I really appreciate Tim Ferriss and his podcast and the work that he's done. He's always talked about how his best weeks is if he can do 2 nights a week of having extended dinners, 3-hour dinners with friends. And he's like, if I can do that every week, he's like, that is the ultimate. And I'm like, bro, if I can do that once a month.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it, and it keeps setting the standard out there that I want to achieve for so many reasons. But it's the conversations like that but this one was interesting for me because I haven't done the rapid fire type things, right? It's always been with small group, individual or whatever, but it's been one longer conversation. The thing here was just cool and just interesting how it was a series of, and perhaps all the goodness that comes from those conversations, the brain, for me, was interpreting it as, this is all connection. I don't care how many people we need to go through. Just keep this up and you're still going to get the benefits out of it.
100%. I think it also probably the novelty of talking to new people and a number of new people. So obviously, I know novelty and dopamine have been heavily associated, and dopamine is responsible for happiness. This is obviously very broad, but I know dopamine is the reward system in your brain, and also has a lot of health benefits. I wonder if that's also a piece of it. I resonate with that. A lot of my friendships take the form of one-on-one long conversations and long hangouts. But I also just feel this almost different energy or different vibe when I'm at a party and talking to a lot of different people, one right after another. I don't fully understand it yet, but I do think there's some different magic to that as well, where You're just like getting a lot of new interactions. And if you think about it, humans evolved from tribe.
Yeah.
And I think it's very unnatural that we've evolved to be so focused on nuclear families. When you're in a group of people, it does signal safety to your brain. It does signal we are a group, we are safe, this is what we crave. So I do think there is also some element of being in a group of people that fulfills different social needs than being one-on-one with a person for like hours at a time. I think both very valuable, both very helpful. But it's interesting that they fulfill different niches, it seems like. A lot of us don't get the group hangs, and a lot of us don't get a series of like one-on-one conversations with like 5 or 6 different people. For me, it has also filled a niche because my friendships tend to be a little differently structured. So it's been really nice to also get to myself very selfishly benefit from just a series of conversations with different people.
In the structure of it, because if I go out to happy hour, and if I go talk with friends, then I'm not going to have 6 meaningful conversations over the course of the happy hour. It's just not going to happen. There may be one of them, but it's not going to be 6. And the rest of them are going to be about griping about what Johnny was doing at the water cooler.
Right.
So the intentionality behind it, I think, is also where the special sauce is that you've set up, where everybody's coming for this. So this is what we're here to do.
Yeah, I think it makes a really big difference to know everyone's there, like for the sake, for variations on similar reasons, where everyone knows they're getting in to these deeper conversations, even if they don't know exactly the specifics of the event. I think just knowing that everyone is there for these intentional conversations just changes it so much. From like, you know, my craft beer club that I went to for years, and only once in a blue moon would I have a conversation that was worth writing home about. What's been so nice about these events is like, it increases the odds that you're actually going to get at least a few great conversations out of it, if nothing else. That like, if you talk to 5 or 6 different people, you're gonna click with at least a couple of them. You're gonna find stuff in common. You're gonna learn stuff about yourself and about other people. I appreciate you saying that a lot. Thanks. That's also something I personally have appreciated about the events.
I appreciated all the conversations and being able to close the loop with my first conversation partner, the unofficial conversation partner. So how this works out is on all my business cards, I've got questions. They come off the website. So anytime that I meet someone, I fan out the questions or all the business cards, and they get to choose a question.
Brilliant.
He's a physics PhD student from Ireland. So this is not somebody that I would normally bump into in my regular circles. And I did thank him for the work that he's doing, because my mind is not like that. So I am so grateful that there are people like him. But even in this one question that he chose, because he was from Ireland, he answered it in a different way.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And the question was, due to your position in society, does it make you more or less likely to go to prison?
Wow.
And so these are the questions that I have on my business cards that I just hand out to everybody.
Nice.
And the intention is that not necessarily for folks to answer, but rather to hold on to as the card. And it's a high quality card. But his response was, by virtue of being in America, my chances have already increased. And I was like, boom. That is an incredible insight that I've only ever given them to people who are in America.
Yeah.
And that was just a glorious insight. It's tragic and sad, but a glorious insight that he was the first one that I've encountered that's had that kind of response. Wow. And then he was able to go into some further details.
Yeah.
But so I got far more than my $18.50 price tag that I paid for the event.
So glad to hear that. I feel like I have this experience all the time when I get to attend a Skip the Small Talk. I'm always surprised by both how different people's experiences are based on just like various identity markers, as well as how similar people's experiences are. It's like people are so fundamentally the same and care about fundamentally the same few things, and they come across such different challenges, especially I think unfortunately in America. I feel like it's been interesting that as I've learned more from people at Skip the Small Talks, I've been able to also adapt Skip the Small Talks to better accommodate a wider range of things. Even in thinking about how do we make this as disability friendly as possible, both physically as well as like, how can we do subtle things so that you don't have to necessarily out yourself as having an invisible disability, but still get your needs met? And how can we make people with marginalized identities feel comfortable with people with backgrounds who might have historically oppressed their identities? How do we make those spaces feel safer? And how do we create specific spaces for people who share the same identity to have an even safer space where it's like, okay, great, I know everyone coming here identifies as LGBTQIA+, so I don't have to worry about if that piece of my identity is going to be like confusing to someone. I'm not going to have to explain all this stuff. I'm going in already knowing that people already understand this piece of myself, at least in some broad way. So yeah, it's been really edifying for me to get to learn more and also just get feedback from like a really wide range of folks and see how different people experience different things. Even as simple as like if it's like a tight space, like folks with larger bodies are going to have a difficult time navigating it. So how do we set up the space physically so that people with larger bodies don't have to be like, hey, I can only be in a certain number of chairs. Please don't put me in a place where I have to ask for a larger chair or something like that. Yeah. So little tiny do that we've just learned along the way of 9 years of getting feedback from the really wide range of folks who do show up to our events, which has been really great for me personally, and as well as just like great for our events to get more and more inclusive over time.
Now, I'm assuming that you're familiar with Priya Parker's work, right?
Yeah,
okay.
She's great.
Okay.
Big fan.
Figured I just asked the seemingly obvious question, but
no, she's fantastic. High recommend to everyone listening. Great book, How We Gather. I think she also has a TED Talk, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, it's just that idea of gathering. How can you be intentional and just make it purposeful? She's just a rock star there.
Yeah, she's fantastic. And also, there's so many unique problems right now in just how do we gather in ways that help people feel included that were probably not questions 100 years ago, for instance. So a lot of us are figuring this out for the first time. And there's also a lot of insights of people have been gathering since the dawn of time, basically. And I feel like it's interesting. I feel like religion has been such an interesting case study in how various religions have landed on like, how do we gather on a regular basis in a way that sort of meets these like larger social needs as well as feeling a greater sense of purpose? How do we do all this? And I've been really interested in the literature about how are modern organizations, now that I know according to research, we are like less religious societally than ever before. I am part of that problem, absolutely, myself personally. But to see the ways we've sort of shifted to like how we gather, how religion has adapted to today, and also how non-religious organizations have adapted to what we've learned from religious organizations about gathering and like how to make people feel included, how to make people feel like they're getting the most out of their experience, how to make it feel a space that is different from your everyday life, but gets baked back into your everyday life. I've been really enjoying learning about that. I know Casper ter Kuile does a lot of interesting stuff on that. He wrote The Power of Ritual, and he's also a bit of an inspiration to me in a lot of his work. And Dr. Thurston, I believe her name is Angie Thurston, did How We Gather, which was like a case study that the Harvard Divinity School did about like the new ways that people are finding community. They did a leadership fellowship with people who were doing modern ways of gathering, and I got to be a part of it, which is really cool. And I learned so much about just like little nuances that you don't necessarily think about. So everything from the lighting to like what you're focusing on, to what your safety policies are, and just like all the little things that I think a lot of people have to just figure out on their own, but I'm very grateful that we get to learn from people who have been doing this for a million years. A big fan of Priya Parker, big fan of the How We Gather folks, and a lot of other great folks doing work in community gathering and stuff like that.
Sadly, we're coming up on time that we're going to need to go towards closing, but I'm not rushing at all, and I'm thrilled for all that we're talking about. One of the questions that I'd like to ask folks is, what is their right now question? So this is beyond what's for lunch and who am I going to get married if I'm going to. What is your right now question? What are the questions that you're working with now?
Yeah, I'll say one of the more fun questions I've found myself engaging with lately has been what makes an experience awesome and what makes storytelling awesome. One of my sort of nerdy interests that I've developed lately has been immersive experiences, broadly defined as whatever immersive means to you, really, but everything from like D&D role playing to like board games to like theater experiences where the audience is participating in some way. I've had a lot of sort of trying to reverse engineer, like, why was this moment so powerful? Why was this moment so interesting? Or why can I not stop thinking about this particular moment that happened in this play or something? This is one interesting thing I've been really interested about and curious about is moments when something narratively is happening in a storyline and something physiologically is happening to you that is making you feel similar feelings to what the narrative also wants you to feel. Sounds really vague, but I guess specifically, like I'm thinking of there was a cool immersive experience called Death of Rasputin. It's vaguely about Rasputin, and there are a lot of characters you can interact with in this sort of theatrical experience. I think the rules are you're not allowed to talk to people, but you can walk around and engage with people in a variety of ways. And there's this one scene where you're doing this like, it was so bizarre, and it's going to sound very culty, I'm realizing as I say this out loud, but I promise it is exactly as culty as it sounds. Where basically, there's this scene, Rasputin like having a very intense narrative moment. But in that intense narrative moment, everyone in this group, all the like guests are given this rope. And so you're in a circle holding this rope. And one of the actors is slowly moving the rope and it starts moving faster and faster to a point where like physiologically, your heart rate is going up because you're helping move this rope faster. And the like music around is like getting more intense and all this stuff. And so physiologically, you are having an experience that is very similar to like narratively what is happening to Rasputin. Like, I was just like, oh, that's such a clever way to trick your body into physiologically getting your heart rate up and getting your breathing faster, which are signals to like that something exciting is happening or getting your own energy level up. So I've been really interested in that, and also just the ways that ties in with our little everyday experiences of like, why do we dim the lights a little at dinner parties? And like, what little things can you do to trick your physiology to be more immersed in an experience? So that's been my question is like, why are these little experiences awesome? And what can we learn from like these cool immersive experiences? And how can we make our little having pizza with our friends, what can we apply to that? If you want to feel more excited during a hangout because they've been boring, like does going on a walk shift that because you're getting your heart rate up? Does doing a new novel activity with someone trick your brain into being more excited about hanging out with someone? So these are the questions I'm engaging with and curious about and playing with a little bit in my own like gatherings.
Wow. You're going to have some fun with that.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun to see the little patterns. Oh, that's why they did this. That's why this moment was so effective. So yeah, it's been really, really fascinating. Again, stuff that's so silly and so low level that you wouldn't necessarily expect, but that make a really big difference.
Well, think about how Alzheimer's patients and the folks in dementia, it's like smell, I think, is the last thing to go.
Yeah.
And so how can you make these memories more tactile? Like when my daughter's wedding, I talked to her, I was like, as you do this, you need to figure out ways that you can make the memory solidified that much more, right?
Yeah.
What does the tablecloth feel like? What do the napkins feel like? What do all of these, beyond just the sights and the sounds and maybe the taste of cake, how can you tie all these other things in? And to your point of how can we make our interactions that much more vivid and that much more sticky, if you will, in engaging all of our senses and beyond just one dimensional?
That's such an excellent point because absolutely, I think especially in the US, a lot of us have this narrative that our brain is like a completely different entity from our physiological experience and that we're just brains in jars going throughout the world. I think we could all really benefit from remembering to get a little more back into our bodies and remembering like, oh, right, I am a brain, but also I want to focus on what this feels like, what this smells like, because that is the stuff that is actually, you're totally right, is going to make those memories stickier.
And just to make the memory more full, because I
Yeah.
remember as I was doing a walking project through DC of just the subtle changes in temperature
Mm-hmm.
of different neighborhoods, or you're hot walking along and you really appreciate the trees or the shade when you
Yeah.
get to it. And it's all those little things
Yeah.
were, and I realized that I missed so much just by virtue of as I'm walking, just even visually, let alone all the other elements that I'm missing.
Yeah.
So yeah, the more that we can engage the world around us, just the more alive we'll be, the fuller the experience instead
Yeah.
of just being a brain in a jar.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you thought about this conversation and knew that we are going to be talking questions, has there been anything that we haven't touched on yet that you were like, oh, I can't wait to talk about this particular thing about questions? Because we could keep going a long,
Yeah.
long time. And I know that for
Absolutely.
sure. But yeah, specifically, any things that we hadn't touched on that you're hoping to touch on?
I think we talked about so much. No, I think we covered everything. Yeah. I think this was like definitely one of the more interesting conversations I've gotten to have in my last few months. So thank you so much for
Excellent.
this.
Excellent. And where is the best place for folks to track you down, but also want to give the opportunity? Are there elements of your organization that you'd like to enhance or mention? Because maybe this is something that you're growing into or looking to grow. So kind of turn it over to you, but really as an opportunity to say, where can folks track you down? But also, what are the exciting things that Skip the Small Talk is up to?
Yeah, super appreciate that. Very generous question. You can find us on www.skipthesmalltalk.com. We have events that are open to anybody. Anybody is welcome to buy a ticket and just show up. But we have a smattering of those in 20 cities in the US and internationally. So feel free to check out if there's one near you. We also have online events. If for any reason that's more accessible to you, we do those as well. Also on our website, skipthesmalltalk.com. I personally have really been enjoying doing, our website doesn't fully reflect this yet, but we've really started expanding our college orientation offerings as well as our just college event offerings. We've gotten some of the most enthusiastic feedback from those where students tell us, this was by far the best orientation event. Can you just do 5 more of these? Can we do this throughout the year? So really outstanding feedback. I think college students in particular are so hungry for more structured connections, and also are some of the populations that I think benefit the most from learning these additional little social skills of how to be a little more vulnerable and how to really practice using your vulnerability muscles. We offer college events and orientation. We've worked with a lot of really awesome clients. Like we do a yearly event with the Harvard Graduate School of Education. We do Harvard undergrads. We have our first event with Wharton Business School coming up, doing their orientation. We've done MIT. We do a yearly event with them. We do events in all our cities for orientation and college events, so hit us up for that. If you're interested in that, look at the website or reach out to us at info@skipthesmalltalk.com. Also, if you're interested in just the card deck and want to have your own question prompt cards that you can ask your friends, family, and other strangers in your life, I do recommend that you get some amount of buy-in, though. Don't just go up to strangers and try this out. You have to ask first. But if you do want the cards, they're available on Amazon. If you just look up Skip the Small Talk cards, you can check those out. I think they're like $15. So if you don't want to contribute to Jeff Bezos's next yacht, you can also buy them in simonschuster.com. But no judgment. I also use Amazon more than I wish I did. But yeah, I think that's most of our things. We got events for everyone. We the card deck, if anyone's interested, and college events, as well as corporate team building events. That's something we've always done and always enjoyed doing those too. But yeah, college events in particular, we've been really ramping up on in the last few months.
Gotcha. Okay. And I'm glad you covered on the corporate events, because I was going to ask you if those were that you did also.
Yeah.
So,
we've definitely done those too. And they're also a lot of fun. The team, we do a lot of team building events. We got to work with GE Aviation, which was awesome. And a huge group of really different ages, really different walks of life that worked really, really beautifully. It was a lot of fun. We've done events with Act Blue. We've done some law firms. We've done a smattering of like very different office cultures, and it's worked really well, which has been really sweet to see. And I feel like a lot of people also are often worried about like, oh, are we going to talk about all our deepest, darkest traumas with our work colleagues? No, of course not. The questions for these are a smaller subset of our questions that we use at our public events. So they're going to be a subset that are going to be like totally work appropriate, but are going to get you feeling more connected to your colleagues, which we've gotten like consistently great feedback on those too. And it's been really also personally fun to see the difference from the beginning of the event where everyone's this is true for college events too, honestly, where people are like looking at their phone, like avoiding eye contact. And then by the end of it, everyone's like chatting and you have to like be like, okay, guys, you can keep chatting here, but I'm going to go by. And they just stick around. So yeah, it's been really wholesome to see.
Nice. Nice. Well, congratulations on all the success. That's having that 5 seconds of insane courage at the beginning and then all the success. So thank you for getting after the loneliness epidemic in such a practical way and sharing your practices and insights with the community on this end. I just really, although I'm new to you, I'm proud of you for the work that you're doing and the care in which you do this and the change that you're seeking to make. So thank you for being a part of the conversation. This has been fantastic.
Of course. Thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate your incredibly thoughtful questions and follow-up questions. A very well-named podcast for absolutely what you do. And this comes from someone who thinks about questions all day long. These are outstanding questions, very well curated. So thank you so much for chatting with me for big old chunk of your Thursday.
Time well spent. Indeed. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ken.
Ashley is the real deal when it comes to questions. She saw the need and had a hunch and brought her passion and expertise to bear to help meet that need. 9 years later, the magic of meaningful conversations continues. These are 4 takeaways I captured. What others did you jot down? Number 1, from superficial politeness to genuine curiosity. Ashley's revelation at the suicide hotline that people consistently underestimate how vulnerable their loved ones want them to be exposes a fundamental misalignment in human connection. Her skip the small talk polling data showing that everyone wishes their conversation partner had shared more reveals we're operating under false assumptions about social safety. We've been conditioned to believe that deeper sharing is unwelcome, when the opposite is true. This speaks to how our culture of surface-level interactions leaves us all yearning for authentic connection, while simultaneously convincing us that others don't want to hear our genuine thoughts and feelings. Question: what assumptions are you making about how much others want to know about your inner world? And how might testing those assumptions change your relationships? Number 2, from individual therapy to community healing through structured vulnerability. Ashley's approach recognizes that loneliness isn't just a personal problem requiring individual solutions. It's a systematic issue that benefits from collective intervention. By creating vulnerability gyms, where people can practice being authentic in low-stakes environments with strangers, she's democratizing emotional growth. The structure removes the burden from any one person to initiate depth, while the time limits prevent the overwhelm that often come with unstructured emotional sharing. This insight suggests that healing happens not just in therapy offices, but in community spaces designed for mutual vulnerability. Question: how might your community benefit from structured opportunities to practice deeper connection, and what role could you play in creating those spaces? Number 3, from abstract emotional needs to psychological requirements for connection. The striking detail about improved sleep after meaningful conversations point to something profound. Human connection isn't just psychologically beneficial, it's a biological necessity. Ashley connects this to research showing loneliness carries health risks equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes daily. while also noting how blue zones with strong community bonds might correlate with longevity. This reframes social interaction from a nice to have to a fundamental health requirement, like exercise or nutrition. We're not just social beings by preference, we're social beings by biological design. Question: if you treated meaningful conversation as essential to your health as sleep or exercise, how would that change your daily priorities and choices? Number 4, from entertaining to nourishing through intentional question design. Ashley's evolution from asking intense questions like, "When's the last time you cried?" to more strengths based prompts reflects a deeper understanding of what people need from social connection. Her insight that we're bombarded with negative stimuli and need positive to neutral interactions to create realistic perceptions of humanity is crucial. The shift from "what's your favorite" to "what's one of your favorites" removes performance pressures while maintaining depth. This suggests that the questions we ask don't just gather information, they shape the entire emotional landscape of our interactions. Question: are your questions designed to extract information or to create conditions where others can share the best parts of themselves? And that's it. To those on the other side of the speaker, thank you for being here. Gratitude shout out to Beauty Pill for the show's music and producer Ben Ford for the technical help. This episode was recorded on Piscataway land. Please engage with this episode in some manner. Download, follow, save, like, share, or comment about something that resonated. This action ensures we're engaging the questioning community. Until next time, keep questioning.